How's it going, everybody? This is Josh KI6NAZ, and yes, my truck is autopiloting. So there's this question that comes up all the time, and I know I started a lot of videos out like this, but I think that there is misunderstanding with a lot of the questions in amateur radio for reasons that I try and answer on my channel. But this one is one that I understand where it comes from, but I think it's kind of disingenuous to go out there and hold this opinion that amateur radio is a rich person's hobby. Now, the high end of amateur radio is a rich person's hobby. It really is, or at least it's somebody who's devoted a ton of their money to the hobby, and they're like at the tips of the most extreme part of it, like contesting, right? People who actually establish really powerful contest stations have put tremendous amounts of dollars in it. And I don't just mean someone who competes well within a contest. I mean someone who's put up massive antenna farms, multiple types of antennas on different towers, people who have multiple operator stations with very expensive radios. There are a number of people like that, and it's great. They like that. That's cool. And everything I'm about to say is one of those like yes but type of answers, so just buckle up a little bit. The reality though is, to participate in the hobby, no, it's not expensive. To have a really pretty decently appointed station, it's not that expensive. Of course, with the prices of everything going up in the world, the question is, well, what makes something not expensive in my mind, or something that is economical for just Joe Average? Well, that I don't know how to answer. You're going to have to determine that. The reality of it is that yes, a lot of these radios can be expensive, and let's just take the base entry point, what I would call the HF standard base station. You've got like three ones that get the most talking about on the internet, being the ICOM 7300, which has been out for a little while now, right? The Yaesu FT710, and then the Yaesu FTDX10. Now, just from those three radios alone, you are looking at spending like $1,400 down to sub $1,000, and that's going to depend on a couple of things, like finding one used, buying it. That's going to be the low side. If there are coupons and discounts, all the major companies have coupons and discounts on these radios that will see them, including the 710, I believe, hit the $1,000 mark this year in 2024. So that's, I think, a pretty high dollar amount, right? That's like, wow, okay, that is actually a pretty high entry point. And then you factor in, you're going to need a power supply, you're going to need coax, and you're going to need an antenna. Those all cost a lot of money too. And in fact, coax has come up significantly in price just because of the material it's made of, which is largely a lot of copper. Why do I say, oh no, it's not really an expensive person's hobby? Well, the reality is that you don't actually have to go with one of those $1,000 radios. I know it's been mentioned, and I know people say, well, that's not really an acceptable alternative of the Xiegu G90 or the ICOM 718. Very, in the case of the ICOM, more of a base station, 100-watt output, but little to no features outside of that. It is just a, simple HF radio. And the Xiegu G90, actually a pretty decent amount of features in it. Downside, 20 watts only. So people are like, well, I don't know. The reality is that 20 watts to 100 watts is not that massive of a difference, and you don't have to trust me. Go watch any of the videos out there that show the comparison between a 20-watt radio and a 100-watt radio. Will you make more contacts with 100 watts? Of course. Yes, absolutely. Joe Average, again, trying to keep that in mind here so I don't start going down the rabbit hole of CW, which, you can get by with a 5-watt radio with Morse code. But with Joe Average, it's likely going to be single sideband. It's likely going to be digital modes. In fact, I think that's going to become the norm pretty much for newcomers hitting the hobby, is that they're going to want both. They're going to want to do digital modes, and they're going to want to do single sideband. So if that's the case, then yeah, the G90 is going to be on its weakest footing on the single sideband side. So $1,000 entry point, wow, for HF, that's kind of expensive. But that's not really the entry point, right? The entry point is VHF, UHF. The entry point is line of sight communication. And you still have the $18 Baofeng in that space. And so some of you are like, well, okay, but you just got done saying HF is, you know, you started with HF. Why'd you start in HF? Because, again, Joe average, most people don't just jump from technician to general. And that is changing to a certain degree, but I think statistically it's still not going to be that high of a number that people just go straight to general, although I would encourage them to do so. By going with VHF, UHF, being a technician and exploring those spaces, you are literally looking at years and years of fun you can have in the hobby using homebrew Yagi antennas to talk to this International Space Station or to talk through satellites or do whatever it is you want to do. 2 Baofengs and a Yagi antenna that work in both 70 centimeters and 2 meters is less than $100, particularly if you make the antenna yourself. Not to mention that everything else you can do in VHF, UHF, actual radio operation, getting used to the radio. And all that time while you're thinking, hey, this amateur radio thing is actually something I'm really interested in, you can go get an inexpensive 10-meter radio or go get yourself a used radio. You could start saving money now, putting it in a bank account that you could then use to buy a decent HF radio. So none of this is like a big surprise. At least it feels like there's a gradual climb up process in which you go, oh, hey, no, actually, I'm really into this and I'm going to be more committed to it. So you can easily just have an HF radio eventually after you save some money. And there's nothing wrong with that, I feel. I feel like we do the same thing with many of our other hobbies that are quite expensive, is we have to put money away for it. We have to budget appropriately. So going back to HF, you should also be building your first antennas. You really should. And they should be something that you spend some time working on the science of it and learning how that all functions, doing the math, and going down those roads, because it will pay dividends again later on in your amateur radio career, to not have a better word at hand. So for me personally, I don't think it's an expensive hobby. I think there are many different exit points at different price points. I have a feeling that the people who gripe the most about this are upset they can't buy top-of-the-line radios for a few $100s. I think that's really what it is, and I think it's a bit of a disconnection from actual reality on what's available to them. More often than not, I feel like that's what it is. But that's also a massive generalization, and I'm not trying to denigrate anyone who wants to go about getting into amateur radio. So if you enjoyed this video, drop me a comment. Let me know what your thoughts are. Is amateur radio too expensive a hobby? I don't know. I feel like it's perfectly expensed. Go get an S-Bit-X. Go get a QRP single sideband radio. Start out there. Those are not too expensive, and you can have a lot of fun, particularly with an S-Bit-X. Now that I think about it, that's a pretty cool radio. Oh, last thing, I totally forgot. This is vitally important. If your exposure to amateur radio is only what you find in some of the retail stores, then yes, you're going to have a limited experience. They only sell some radios. They don't sell all of the radios that are on the market. So in those cases, you actually do need to look on the internet. You do need to go on YouTube. You do need to explore other spaces. I know the Xiegu G90 is sold at HRO, for instance. I don't know if it's sold elsewhere. But the S-Bit-X, I just mentioned it. Some of you are like, what the heck is an S-Bit-X? It's a radio made in India, and it's like a hobbyist radio. Some are kits. You can actually buy the S-Bit-X, I believe is... No, I think it comes in both ways, a kit and a completed unit. They're so much fun. They're a lot, and you can learn a lot while getting involved in it, but you're not going to find it in the major radio retailer spaces in most cases. You're going to have to look for it online. So yeah, I will give you that some of this is not somewhat easy to find, and you do kind of have to look for it. But that's another reason to click subscribe on my channel, and make sure you click that bell, because YouTube changed its algorithm again a month or two ago, and it is now harder, if you don't watch amateur radio videos, to get some of my content, because it's going to show you whatever you're watching more of these days. I am Josh, KI6NAZ. Appreciate you watching. 73. Sometimes I feel the catalyst for these videos create good ideas, but they kind of deserve their own responses, but tailored kind of specifically and maybe towards the back end of these videos. So that's what this is going to be. I got like rapid fire 4 comments from the same person, and they're obviously on a bit of a soapbox, which is fine. You know, you can be passionate about whatever you want, but I feel like it's missing the mark. The comments there, and I wanna state that amateur radio is different in different parts of the country as far as like people going out to locations, people who actually go into brick and mortar stores. I know here in Southern California, the ham radio outlet in Anaheim is always busy. There's people generally all over, and wow, that guy didn't even signal. He just went. Way to go, semi-truck. Then now how do I qualify that as like major foot traffic in a store? It's kind of tough because amateur radio is such an extremely niche hobby, and to the fact that we have companies like HRO, Gigaparts, and DX Engineering that have such an interesting brick and mortar space, and they're all kind of like uniquely different, right? If you think about Gigaparts opening their huge Huntsville store, HRO with lots of stores, like more than any of the competitors, heads and shoulders, and then like DX Engineering, which is actually in an off-roading store. Basically, they're connected as far as the same mother brand. Now, that doesn't mean that much, other than they kind of came to their own ways of getting there. Now, I have been to the Las Vegas store at Gigaparts before they closed it, and yeah, it was a small store. But the cool thing about that location was it was a warehouse for a lot of what they ship. Not everything, but they've got other warehouses. But it was really cool to go there because you were almost guaranteed whatever you were looking for that was on their website, you could find it in that location. And in fact, that's what I had done. In fact, there's a couple of times, emergency situations, quote unquote emergency, where I went to that store specifically because I was by Las Vegas. The 2 times that come to mind was when I was testing a radio for Shegu, and it had a quality issue where it just was not functioning anymore. And it was the only radio I had brought with me for HF that weekend. And so I ended up running over to the Gigaparts in Las Vegas and buying a Yaesu FT818. It was my first actual 817/818 variant. And I was able to do a POTA with it. I was very happy. I made a couple of other videos about that radio. The second was when I was actually coming home from Ohio when I got COVID. I was pretty sick. I let them know that by the time I got there, I was feeling a lot better. But I basically ordered everything from the car and let them know what I was looking for. And then I paid over the phone from the parking lot, and I just grabbed my stuff and I went about my business. And I'm calling that a victory. So we got the 10. I'm getting out of there. In fact, I'm going to shut the computer down. Don't need it anymore. Well, I'm incredibly glad that I could close out that POTA. So I got one. A little bit compromised. Not what I would have taken gear-wise traditionally, but we did it. Thanks for your help, everybody. That made a contact with me today. Yes. And it was actually Jose who I got to talk with multiple times. He was I think he pretty much ran the store there. Great guy, really helpful, really knowledgeable. And again, into all kinds of interesting things beyond just the standard, HF type stuff in amateur radio, which is really, really cool. By the way, I'm still autopiloting. This is all still while I'm driving through the town. The major stores are only going to show you things that they believe are going to be popular within the community, that are actually going to make money, because they got to stay in business, of course, right? Sure. So you're still going to have to take a little bit of a deep dive and put some energy into finding what they have out there. Further, a lot of their business is online. That's just the reality of where things are going. That's not to say that the brick and mortar stores are in threat of closing. I'm not saying that at all. In fact, I would assume, just my guess, is that their sales in person are pretty close to their sales online, which I still think is a good thing. We should be happy about that, right? We want these stores to stay in place because, and this goes back to the comment to kind of put a button up, to put a bow on it, you need to go to brick and mortar stores. If you have the capability to do that, you need to go. And the reason for it is quite simple from my point of view. you need to put hands on these radios. If you're going to save up your dollars and you have spent enough time in the hobby and you think you're committed to it, you should go test drive your radio, just like you would test drive a car, just like you would do any major thing like have an inspection done on a home, anything like that. This is part of the buying process from my point of view. You need to go to a location where radios are set up that are either on a dummy load or on an actual antenna, and you should operate the radio. And all of these companies expect you to want to do that and are okay with you doing that as well. So you need to ask the right questions. You need to talk to somebody who's familiar with the radios if that's possible, but you need to go hands-on. My videos, the videos online, are not a direct replacement to your tactile input, what you feel when you're touching a radio. How the radio operates, the menu systems, the dials, all that stuff are vitally important that you try. Barring that, or you don't have access to stores in your area, consider going to a ham fest where there is going to be the manufacturers you're looking at buying from. You need to put hands on, and at least at ham fest they'll have radios set up for you to try and do that. Okay, thanks so much again, guys. That's it. 73.